Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jay Olson from Oppenheimer. Joel Sandler and I are moderating this next panel discussion on new modalities for rare and orphan CNS disorders. And I want to thank Leonard Sachs and his amazing team for hosting us here today and organizing this great event. We have a distinguished group of panelists here, and we had a really lively prep session where we talked about a number of factors involved in the selection of novel modalities, ASOs, cell and gene therapies, pros and cons versus traditional small molecule approaches, and the intersection of novel modalities with rare and orphan CNS diseases. These facts, some of these are listed here, and we'll be discussing them in today's panel discussion. And ultimately, I suppose, as is often the case, the financial incentives also play a major role here. So I just wanted to share these sales forecasts with you. These are consensus forecasts, not mine, for just a selection of drugs for CNS rare diseases. You can see here that these sum up to $10 billion over the next few years. Many of these have novel modalities and obviously present a compelling financial incentive for the topics that we're about to discuss. So with that, I thought we could go to introductions. As I said, I'm Jay Olson. I do sell-side research at Oppenheimer, and I'll turn it over to you, Joel.
Hey everyone, Joel Sandler, Ipsos Healthcare. Work with clients large and small to help provide strategic guidance for companies on the path towards value inflection, whether it's in terms of partnering or fundraising. And then on the pharma side, on the in-licensing side, on the other side of the partnering table, vetting potential pipeline opportunities within the evolving competitive landscape. Really excited. Welcome to JPM. We've got great weather, and that's worthy of celebration in its own right. And what a cool panel. I've been doing this with Jay now for several years, and it's been a nice collaboration. So looking forward to a lively discussion. Chris.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Chris Reyes. I'm CEO and founder of Bloom Science. It's kind of a relevant. My first company was actually a monoclonal antibody company, but we had ADCs about a decade ago, so it was NextGen at the time. So I can speak a little bit on that. But Bloom Science is focused on, I think we checked two boxes here, rare neurological conditions such as Dravet syndrome, CDKL5 deficiency disorder. These are rare developmental epilepsies. And then we have a novel modality because our goal is really to reverse engineer the ketogenic diet. We take the cells that actually do that, and that's the microbes in our gut. And we've been able to show, as we'll present today, and we presented yesterday, that we have some really nice clinical data to support that thesis.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Clément Gautier, and I lead the external innovation for rare disease and neuroscience at Ipsen. So Ipsen is a mid-sized pharma company based in France, and we are at the moment very much relying on oncology in terms of sales, and really aiming to diversify and to build on the existing two other franchises, which are rare disease and neuroscience. And so I'm very happy to be here, and also I wish you a very good JPM.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Ilise Lombardo. I'm the CEO of a biotech company called Noema Pharma. And we actually have a portfolio of, first in disease small molecules. We're looking across a number of orphan, rare, and prevalent neuroscience conditions. That being said, I don't know that I'm here anachronistically. Myself, I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist by training. I've certainly done extensive scientific work across gene therapies, molecular genetic, and further development in the CNS space across different modalities. So I think as hopefully the panel and the discussion evolves, we can really think about how these new modalities are going to be working, obviously, and hopefully synergistically with the small molecules and small molecule targets that we have, and also how to think about the overall clinical development programs for them.
And hi, I'm John Walsh. I'm the co-founder and VP of Technology at Unlearn.AI. We are actually, so we don't develop our own drugs, but we help pharma and biotech companies run faster and more efficient trials by creating digital twins of clinical trial participants. So really our focus is on helping model disease progression and implement those models in trials to make them more effective for sponsors and for patients. Our interest in novel modalities is oftentimes those kinds of indications require interesting trial designs, interesting forms of evidence, and really helping those kinds of programs succeed. Thank you.
Great. So wonderful panel. I'm just going to dive in with the first question. So the title or the topic of the discussion has a couple of different components to it. Novel modalities, rare orphan conditions. Even within novel modalities, there has to be some definition in terms of what we're talking about. Are we talking about novel modalities? Are we talking about novel mechanisms, therapeutic targets, some combination thereof? So maybe just at a high level, I'll ask panelists and whoever wants to jump in first. What do you find most compelling about novel modalities or mechanisms within the context of orphan rare conditions in CNS? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I'll start. I think when we talk about novel modalities, we have to always go back to this fit for purpose kind of thinking. Although you may actually have an invention at a university that you're really excited about, it's a novel modality, and you're going to start a company around it. Really, the goal should be there's this unmet need, biological need, patient need, and there's really only a classic approach. Traditional modalities aren't going to get us there. Certainly in the rare orphan space, in particular neurological conditions, I think that is the case, right? We've seen great progress and some really exciting drugs for these conditions, but there's such a huge unmet need, either from a resistance perspective or even just really effective drugs. So a novel modality really needs to meet that biology in a unique way that a traditional modality can't. So I think that's kind of the first part. But secondly, I think what we're going to see in this space, and we can talk more about it, as mentioned, the ASOs, I think we're going to see transformational options and opportunities for patients in the next decade. True disease modifying, and we've got to be very careful about using that. I think we overuse it, but multi-symptom or disease modifying therapeutics that these patients are truly desperate for, and I don't think we get there with traditional small molecules or biologics.
So obviously, having more tools in the toolbox is obviously amazing, and I think one of the things is it really allows you to go for some of these very high value targets, even the genetic ones. Those you really feel are validated targets, but we could not attain before, with small molecules. And so going for that is obviously very interesting. But from a partnering perspective, from our company, it is also very interesting because it allows you, I would say, to somehow de-risk or to put the risk at a relatively early stage. So basically, before you spend all the bucks, you are going to have some de-risking possibility. And from a partnering strategy, it's really interesting to go back to management and to tell them, okay, sure, we're gonna have some risk, and because we all know that these modalities come with challenges, right? But the way we see it is they tend to be on the earlier side of things, in terms of because you have these higher, value targets, and so it's really interesting from a partnering perspective on our side.
I think that there is a breadth and diversity as we think about both CNS rare orphan diseases as well as the new modalities that are being explored today. But one of the points I think that's important has to do with the fact that a number of these rare disorders are really genetic in basis, and they have multi-system and diverse symptomatology that we often see presenting early on in life and then progressing in a non-reversible way. So I think the hope and promise that's rather unique of some of these modalities is for potential early intervention and disease modification, slowing, if not stopping of some of these symptoms, and the ability to tackle both CNS symptoms as well as some broader systems as well. Of course, I think, and we'll get into that, that's also one of the challenges, because that's not traditionally where we focus or have an easy go of it when we think about clinical development, clinical trials, and of course registration. But I do think that's really an area that's unique to promise for a lot of these new modalities.
Yeah, and building on what Ilise said, I think it creates a really high risk-reward scenario. If you have strong hypotheses or even validated mechanisms of action, you can explore a novel modality to understand, can I target this? Can I actually make a big difference to patients, especially in rare indications where that's really valuable? But then it presents a real challenge for clinical development. How do you actually construct lines of evidence and make decisions quickly and understand if you're on the right track or not?
Great. I want to follow up on several of the panelists commented on the ability of novel modalities to hit targets that you may not be able to reach with traditional modalities, and also the potential for additional clinical benefits with novel modalities, including, I think several of you mentioned the potential for disease modification. And maybe focus in a little bit on which next-gen modalities are most attractive and have the greatest potential to provide these advantages that you've identified. And then if you don't have these modalities in-house, maybe going back to the deal-making panel earlier, how can you access them? What kind of deals do you think are on the table to get access to the next-gen modalities that you're most interested in?
All right. So, I think we all have different flavors and tastes, like regarding the modalities. Obviously, at the moment, we're very excited about oligonucleotides. I really think we see so many progresses in terms of chemistry and, to really address some of the challenges. I think we're also seeing a lot of progresses in terms of manufacturing and CMC in this field. So it's going very, very fast. Some of the the challenges are going to remain, obviously, I'm not going to list them, but clearly something that is very interesting. Another modality where I do see a lot of interest, at the moment is actually small molecule, but for RNA. So it's something where we do see really expanding the space in terms of targets. And we really, start to see some really, really nice, results. We did sign a fantastic deal last year with Skyhawk Therapeutics, and there are many other actors in the field. And that is really something where we try to, hopefully to combine the benefits of both worlds. So it's absolutely great. From a partnering strategy, and point of view, obviously, the way to go from our side is more like a buy mode than a make mode. So obviously, we try to reach out to the people in biotech who really have the very strong expertise. So either through different flavors of deals, in licensing and whatnot, and even M&A if possible, because But one of the challenges in terms of partnering for us is how do we secure and maintain access to the technology, right? If we're talking really about the newest ones, right? I'm not talking about antibodies, but even the super new ones, sometimes, you're gonna rely on one or two people, really in the company. And of course you can make some, I would say, some packages, but we're still in a free world, right? So people are, free to come and go. So that's obviously sometimes an issue we have. And so we really need to make sure in our deals that we really secure and maintain the access to this novel, technology.
I can jump in a little bit. I tend to be a little bit modality agnostic. I think in the sense of that, I think the best modality is the one that works the best for what your goal is. Again, I think when you begin to look at it from our perspective, I'm not a microbiologist by any means. As I mentioned, my first company was monoclonal antibodies. Why did I decide to start a company around microbiome-based therapeutic? It's definitely out there. And that's really because that modality fit the product profile, and there was data to really support that route, and really very few options to take it another direction, right? It's very difficult to combine 8 to 10 small molecules in a single drug. It's not going to happen. So I think that's part of it there. But I think, as we look at these next-gen novel modalities, there's some really key factors there. One, yes, absolutely you need to see efficacy, but you really touched on it. What is holding back a novel modality? Some of these gene therapies have been around for decades. Cell-based therapies around for quite some time. ADCs we see, as I mentioned, go in and out of fashion, and it's because of technological breakthroughs on manufacturing, scalability, some of the chemistry, delivering, how we can actually deliver these, the active component. I think really it's a matter of do all those pieces fit in place at the right time, in the right opportunity, with that efficacy data to support it. And in truth, that's the best opportunity.
Just to maybe build on that, but take it in a slightly further direction to what you were saying, Chris. I think that it's a very exciting time when it comes to CNS and drug development in CNS. I think we all know we go through phases where we're fashionable and phases when we're not, and it feels as if we're fashionable again, which is fantastic. And there is incredible innovation as we think about some of these, in particular rare diseases, where we can understand the molecular basis of disease. But Chris, you bring up a really important point, and that has to do with the technological breakthroughs. It's maybe not the novelty of the scientific approach, but it's the ability to deliver it safely, reliably, and obviously to the CNS and to the system target that we need, but to be able to also manufacture it under appropriate controls. And I think that sometimes that's not the sexiest part of our job and our work, but it's really important that we have these conversations here in these fora, with both investors and potential partners, to realize that that's a lot of the work that we need to be doing, and we need time, space, and investment to make sure that we can make those breakthroughs to ultimately hit those targets.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just comment that I think from the perspective of trying to help certain modalities design succeed, it's really interesting when there are really clear lines of evidence you want to point to say this biomarker is a definitive test of is this drug working, because then you can use our approach is using digital twins modeled on past patient data to understand what's going to happen in a study and provide as much additional evidence as possible to that trial. Leveraging clear lines of evidence can actually really be beneficial in those cases to make a strong case or not for development.
All right, so let's flip the question on its head. So if Chris is saying he's modality agnostic, which I understand, then the question really becomes, all right, if you're not trying to be a hammer in search of a nail, to use a hackneyed phrase, but rather thinking from the perspective of disease pathology, unmet medical need, and really thinking about how you bring novel solutions to indications, whether it's large heterogeneous diseases with a biomarker-defined patient subset or monogenic, more homogeneous disorders, which when kind of looking across CNS disease writ large, are there certain areas in terms of indications or disease areas? CNS is a huge category. And I guess, we are talking about rare. So within the rare or the patient biomarker-defined subset categories, are there certain ones that kind of jump out as being more or less attractive for novel modalities?
Yeah, and obviously I'm speaking a little bit to what I'm familiar with, but I think there are some really good programs in the developmental epilepsy space. Stoke has a ASO and Dravet syndrome, and I think they just reported some, really exciting phase 2 data. I think it will definitely transform the landscape. This is true disease modifying. Again, as you mentioned, these are diseases that start really early. They're very complicated. Multiple symptoms. So, these are largely characterized as developmental epilepsies by seizures, but cognition and motor coordination, speech, GI, these are all significant symptoms that patients and the advocates and caregivers are saying, hey, pay attention to these. So I think this is a really good space. I think when we begin to think about this, break this down, we're also going to see this probably applied to diseases that we don't think of it in that way. We look at ALS, and ALS is a collection of 40 different genetic, etiologies there that is grouped together in this larger bucket, probably just because it manifests in a similar manner. As we learn more about these conditions and diseases, I think we'll begin to break these apart. But I think there's been some good progress from a larger program, as I mentioned, Stoke, but then there's some really exciting not-for-profit work with ASOs in these ultra rare, developmental epilepsies, where it's literally clinical trials of 3 or 1 sometimes. And that's not really commercially viable, but it's making a huge impact for those patients. And so I think that from my perspective, those are some...
And provides proof of principle for expanding to
Absolutely.
other related.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clément?
Yeah, I mean, for me, no specific areas of neuroscience. It's like, more like the monogenic disease, and there's still plenty around. So where obviously, they're going to benefit a lot, from all of these kind of new modalities that can alter. I mean, is there basically at the DNA level, at the RNA level, all these things, are still on the table for grab. So I think, these are really areas. So, obviously you got more of them in neurodegeneration space at the moment, but clearly, there are a lot. So maybe one exception would be for the autoimmune disease, where I think, really the antibodies are pretty gonna much make the job. But for the other ones, really regarding, monogenic, I really believe there's a lot to do for all AV, and ASOs and the like. So.
Well, I think I'll probably refrain from speaking to that specifically regarding disease targets for novel modalities. This is where, as I come in working specifically on small molecules, it really is sort of flipping that approach a little bit. We can think about what you were both discussing, the specific potential monogenic disease or even multivariant diseases, and the ability to target that fundamentally and treat, as I'd mentioned, holistically across a number of different symptom domains. Whereas as we think about novel small molecules and certainly the complementary potential of small molecules and new modalities, we actually approach it a little bit differently. So it just is, it's a different way for us to think about it, where we think about, for example, the rare epilepsies. That's a space a lot of us are in right now and really hoping to make significant strides on. We can think of approaching that from a small molecule mechanism that is more broad and genetically agnostic. So we're more specific where it comes to the symptom, but we can apply it more broadly to the patient type and or to the patient actual, disease etiology. Same thing with, I think there's a really untapped potential in neuropathic pain and some of the rare conditions in neuropathic pain. Actually, there are just so many of them as you think about it, but you can think about how the different approaches will really address this. And so some of these very targeted modalities are fantastic because they zone in on the patients. They can be very precise in terms of precision medicine, and they can more holistically tackle the symptomatology that patient type will have, versus a novel MOA with a small molecule that can be also relatively precise, but precise in symptomatology and perhaps cross a number of different ultimate etiologies.
If I can just jump in, I think it's a really, really good point. When we look at these gene therapies, they're very targeted. It's going to be that. It's not like you're going to be able to use it for, a wider range of indications. So yeah, I think what's key then for, say, cell-based therapies is you can overcome that specificity. With small molecules, you look for common pathways. That's kind of this next generation chemistry, next generation target identification. And that, I think, is a little bit also where some of these genetic therapies is also helping to push the field to be more innovative, to think a little bit differently, particularly when you look at rare, because again, from a commercial perspective, it's very attractive initially, but you do need to have a more expansive, I think, view of where you want to take it.
So maybe just to follow up on a number of the panelists have commented on genetic drivers of rare CNS diseases, and then we've also heard a lot of comments on genetically defined subsets of more common CNS diseases like LRRK2, Parkinson's, GBA1 Parkinson's, APOE4, homozygous Alzheimer's. So I guess in the context of those genetically defined rare and subsets of more common CNS diseases and the application of next-gen modalities, where does precision medicine fit in? Are we moving towards more of a precision medicine model for the application of novel modalities?
Yeah, I can maybe jump in. I think in some cases it's almost required. You have these populations that have really strong, clear response, but they can be more homogeneous. So you need to think about differentiators that can segment your population, help you understand who should be in trials, who should be getting, who's going to likely respond. And I think in the case of in a neurofilament light for the SOD1 mutation ALS, in the review packet from FDA, there was some nice explanation of the evidence of neurofilament light, its value for segmenting the population and prognostic kind of influence. And that's a great tool then to understand the patient population much more deeply. So it takes a lot of effort, but it's really worth it when you can make that investment.
Well, I think that obviously there's a big push in the field and in the sort of medical treatment to better understand these patient populations, better understand these illnesses. I mean, we have a history. Certainly I can speak from psychiatry, and obviously we had our plenary session just before, but also in neurology, bringing up ALS, we've talked about the epilepsies as well, of being very observational and symptomatically driven as we create these syndromes. And we really are still working in a field of syndromes which differentiates us, I think, substantially from a lot of other areas in medicine, and then obviously how it relates to drug development. There's certainly, though, I think, ways in which we have to build this bridge simultaneously from both shores and hopefully meet in the middle, whereby both clinical practice, clinicians, professional organizations, as well as advocacy groups also have to start to recognize the value and the diversity of the patient populations that we've traditionally clustered together. And it's important that as we develop new treatments for potential subsets, that these subsets are understood, recognized, and that we have that validation, if you will, from the clinical community, so that we know that we're actually going to deliver something that has value.
So scientifically speaking, obviously precision medicine is the way to go, right? I mean, it's usually common knowledge. We're saying that basically neuroscience is now where oncology was 30 years ago. So obviously that's still the case, and we're gonna make this journey. We still have to face a lot of challenges there. So I really think in terms of diagnostics and even genotyping, we're not there, in terms of identification of these patients. We know that, for example, LRRK2 PD, there's still challenges for recruitment of the patients. It's not that easy. And also you lack natural histories. So a lot of challenges, but that also means a lot of opportunities, I guess. And this is where obviously we need some potential partners for this type of development. So yeah.
All right, so I think we're kind of dancing around the question of trial design and regulatory considerations. Why don't we ask it directly? And maybe, John, since we've been going this way, I'll ask you to chime in. Just in terms of, we've seen a trend in the last couple of years of FDA's willingness to allow novel therapies onto the market sooner for rare unmet medical need conditions, based on single-arm studies, based on natural history data, biomarker data, surrogate biomarker data, things like this. Obviously, companies are then on the hook to confirm, which can go a number of different ways. It gets also, I think, into the question of advocacy and pushing drugs through that maybe aren't efficacious and burdening the healthcare system or burdening the individual patients and caregivers. But Let's talk about the regulatory aspect of novel modalities or more established modalities, but in the context of rare and orphan.
Sure. So I mean, the regulators have a difficult job in this space. They have to understand both balance a large unmet need, especially for a lot of rare and orphan indications, patient population advocacy groups that can be rightfully extremely vocal and advocate for the introduction of therapies that they believe are safe. They also have to hold everyone to a high standard of evidence. And I think we've seen a relatively healthy kind of movement by FDA towards more accelerated approvals, more bars that people can clear earlier, and then test things in the market that are safe. The really important thing is to understand what evidence is actually compelling. So are there biomarkers that are going to be accepted either as a blanket statement or for specific types of designs in specific modalities by FDA? And then what evidence do you need to generate for clinical benefit beyond that? And how strong of a link is there between biomarkers and actual benefit? You don't want to end up in a situation where you have pretty poor surrogate biomarkers, and that's happened in neuro and other indications pretty famously, with pretty bad outcomes for everyone.
I could talk a little bit to that, but from maybe the other perspective, or the other topic, which is kind of the novel modality. And what we found is, frankly, the FDA has been very encouraging and very open. In fact, since we're heading into kind of a rare space, pediatric space, have actually encouraged us to go into even a more susceptible population. Because again, the thought is, you want to balance that benefit-risk ratio there, and really work with us on, and I think this is true for most novel modalities, on how do you move it forward, right? They're learning. The truth is we are teaching them, and they're trying to catch up. And so that is a really important component to work very closely and early with the agency, and we found that to be extremely helpful in terms of both how we think about our clinical design, but then how we're actually developing it. What are some of the key questions that we need to address? And we've also pushed the agency, at least in our early conversations, around certain concepts that they may have thought differently about. And I think that's a result of their openness to again, these novel biologies, but also novel modalities, but also some novel biology as well.
Great, thanks. Elise?
And I think that's a really important point just to emphasize in terms of engaging with the agency early. We're talking across the board about very innovative approaches and programs, and we have to understand take a pragmatic approach in terms of who is the agency, who's there, what's their area of expertise. They certainly can't keep up with all of the innovation that we are going to be presenting them with. And I think, especially potentially now as we go forward, it is a stretched organization, and their scientific experience is really not going to be across all the sort of myriad of modalities, approaches, and biomarkers that we want to bring forward. So if we keep that in mind, there are a number of programs that FDA has that will allow small companies, innovative companies, and novel mechanisms and modalities to engage frequently and early. And sometimes, I've heard some companies have the approach saying, we don't really want to go too early to FDA. We want to wait until we have something more substantial. But I've actually never found that to be the case. I've actually found them to be very willing partners to come on the journey with us, to be educated. And it's really a relationship that you build over years as you're engaging very early on from your development all the way through, so that not only do you ultimately have the science behind potential biomarkers, but they have a full understanding and have really kind of gone through it with you as well. And so then you can have sort of a much more rapid, I think, path to agreement as you're looking to bring this into clinical development.
So it sounds like there's a lot of self-awareness at the agency about what they know, what they don't know, and their willingness to take on challenges.
If you engage with them. So I have to say that's a reward for you, and there is self-awareness if you present yourself as a willing partner. I do think that there's it's a different perspective if they feel that they're playing catch up, and they might not have the expertise to learn as quickly as they need to.
Yeah. Clément, what does that mean from a partnering perspective? Are you looking for companies that are having those conversations? Do you see yourself at Ipsen as taking on that role?
I mean, that's obviously a very important part of the due diligence, like, from a partnering perspective. We need to know, like, how mature is the partner regarding the conversations they've had, like, with the FDA. So it's obviously going to depend also on the stage of development of the program. But, like, engaging as early as possible with the agencies is absolutely something that is, like, needed for us. Regarding, like, whether it's going to be the partner or it's going to be with us, like, we're always trying to, really add as much value as possible. So we need to engage this conversation with the partner early to really understand what is their perspective, what is their strategy regarding engaging the agencies. But, like, trying to bring also our specific knowledge in the field, because, like, we have a long history in rare disease and also in neuroscience. So obviously having this perspective sometimes brings a lot to a partnership, because we still see sometimes naivety, if I may, like, regarding engaging the agencies. So yeah, always a big part for us.
All right, since patient advocacy groups have really moved to the forefront of reimbursement discussions for CNS rare diseases and even regulatory considerations, and they even obviously play a role in clinical development, facilitating trial enrollment and finding patients. I guess, can you just comment on how you guys plan to work or do work with patient advocacy groups? I guess maybe starting with you, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our strategy has been to engage as early as possible. So we actually built an internal team to do that, actually even pre-phase one. And that has been incredibly useful. We were talking in our pre-call about how it's often undervalued, either from a partnering or even an investor side. It's not one of the boxes usually that you're asked to check, but for rare disease, I really think it should be. We've learned so much from engaging with the community, both from a structured perspective, working with foundations, but also directly with, patients and their caregivers. They're coming to us, and they're very knowledgeable. They're very motivated. They're actually coming to us and saying, hey, this is why we're excited about what you are doing. We think it might affect this. And, for example, nobody focuses on GI conditions and rare epilepsies, but some 90% of these patients have significant GI factors, and these can actually lead to greater susceptibility to seizures and seizure susceptibility. We really didn't know that until the patients really started consistently coming up to us, telling us this. Now, it's anecdotal by nature, but then you begin to follow up with your own research and begin to build that story. So I think from a very simple foundational perspective, but then, this is going to be the patient base that will eventually be on your clinical studies, that will be actually you will be marketing to. So building those relationships, having them understand what your drug does is just foundational, I think, and so important.
From our perspective, obviously, I would also agree on this idea that you need to engage as soon as possible. So for me, there are two reasons for that. First, you need to know if you're going in the right direction in terms of, like, what you're trying to solve for the patients, because I've had a recent example where myself, I was trying to design something and to think about a program, but actually, what we were trying to solve was not that relevant for the patients, And so engaging them very early on to see, whether it's going to be meaningful is extremely important, because we need to also, keep in mind that we still don't really know how to measure success in many of these diseases. So you need to engage them very early on to really make sure that, again, you're going to be with something that's absolutely meaningful. Going back to the modality, also, you really need to engage the patients and know if the modality is going to be adapted to the patients. And I have a recent example, again, I could give you, regarding the potential partnerships. And it was so nothing like, I mean, everything is kind of public, etc. But like, so it was like for Rett syndrome, and like these poor kids, they have a lot of like panic attacks, and like it's a very big issue like for them. But like, the modality and the program we were discussing was about like, a nanobody that would require a daily injection. A daily injection for this type of kids, is really going to be very problematic. It's going to probably create, more panic attacks. So basically what you're trying to solve is like, I mean, you might be bringing more issues to these patients with the wrong modality. So again, engaging these patients very early on to make sure that you are using the right modality, that is something that is going to be acceptable, is very important. And so I just mentioned for Rett, for example, if you think about some of the neurodegenerative disease, do all patients accept, an hour-long infusion, like transfusion? Not all of them. In some conditions, yeah, sure, like they know they might die, and so that's very serious. But like for some of them, for some of these indications, you're gonna have a lot of agitation. The patients are very hard to manage. So having these type of things, it's gonna be a very, very big issue. So again, the right measure, meaningful measure, and also the right modality is gonna be very important.
Fully agree in terms of that and the partnership. And I will say across many rare indications, diverse rare indications throughout my development history, I have always gained substantial insights from partnerships with advocacy groups. Now sometimes it's harder than others. There are some indications where advocacy groups are very well organized, are very thoughtful, and are very coordinated. And there are others where it's much more cottage and diffuse and fragmented. But in all of those situations, it is certainly worth listening to what they have to say, learning from them, and really working with them. Because especially as we're being innovative and really pushing forward the boundaries, I think, of our scientific knowledge and understanding of these diseases, at the end of the day, there is a customer, and that customer is a patient in mind. And the more that we can learn and understand about what he or she actually needs, the better our treatments and clinical trials and development programs can be. Then down the road, I think that once you engage in that partnership and once you're confident that you're actually meeting the needs of the patient population, and sometimes this also includes the caregivers and family systems, they can be incredible advocates for you. As we had spoken about engaging with FDA, engaging with them early, really speaking to the importance of the medical need, because not only may FDA be limited in terms of their understanding of the modality that you're bringing forward or the science behind it, they're not going to be experts in all of these rare diseases. And so to be able to really paint a compelling, aligned, and impactful picture is going to help a development program immensely as we're working in these areas of high need.
Yeah, and I'll agree with what Ilise said. I see a lot of heterogeneity in terms of patient advocacy groups, how well they're resourced, organized, and what they're equipped to be able to help with. We work with a lot of different indications where we actually go and identify data sources, build models, and patient advocacy groups are a great partner. I think they can really be a huge asset. The patient advocacy groups, they want that innovation. If you can show them that there's real value there, they want to see innovative products come to market because it has a great benefit. And sometimes there is a risk-benefit trade-off you have to consider, but they can be great tools for engagement with regulators, with understanding trial design, and then eventually market access and things like that. I think from the investment side, there is an enormous unmet need in greater organization and equipping patient advocacy groups to do a good job for the community. Oftentimes in competitive, outside of neuroscience, and competitive indications, there's a lot of division of resources and information and data. In neuroscience, there has been a culture of more data sharing, but it could really use a shot in the arm to say, well, especially for rare and orphan indications, how do we build resources that everyone can benefit from?
All right, so big picture question to finish up. If we take a step back and kind of look at where things are, where they seem to be headed, I mean, Jay had his slide up earlier showing this is a growth business to be in. There have been some success stories. They have kind of clustered, I would say, like SMA has been a good story. Some of the muscular dystrophies, and then the odd success story in Rett, in ALS, in rare subsets of depression, psychiatry. So I'm not going to ask you to predict where the next big breakthrough is going to be, but just given everything that we've been talking about in terms of willingness of regulators to get these things out onto the market sooner, evolving science, which seems to be translating. I think we're 25 years out from the Human Genome Project, and things are finally starting to translate from a modality perspective, which is great. Hasn't been an easy road. Where are we going to be 5 years from now if we're talking about this topic? Not an easy question to answer.
Well, I really think, again, it's a very exciting time for neuroscience. I mean, maybe last year was a bit underwhelming in terms of approval, but I mean, obviously, we have seen so many nuts being cracked recently, and I think it's only the beginning. If we talk about, Skyclarys for Friedreich ataxia, it's good, right? But there's so much more to be done, right? But this is such great news because now we know that the scales are good, right? They can measure success, so we can do better. So having, so many rare neurological disease, where you can start to see signal is absolutely amazing. And I think, we're just going to see more and more and more. So again, you need a first step. And we've seen some of this first step. I mean, again, you mentioned DIBU. Fantastic, right? I mean, again, we're starting to have a good measure of success, and we're going to see more and more. So very, very exciting. I still think, we're probably going to be around the same, in terms of new modalities versus the small molecules. I think we're around 50% if you take the last 5 years approximately. I would, again, no crystal ball, but I would guess, we're still going to stay in the same area because so many targets, in neuro are really great for small molecules, and also because the new modalities, I still think we missed the finesse of small molecules. We don't really have the finesse of allosteric modulators and things like that, with these new modalities. And so I would say probably around the same. My 2 cents.
Yeah, 5 years is like a nanosecond in biotech and drug development, so to speak. So I think I'm so encouraged by the enthusiasm that I've been seeing around CNS and around and the support for continued innovation in CNS development, and that hasn't always been the case. So it's really fantastic. I think that there are a number of small, focused companies that are really pushing the envelope in terms of bringing forward innovation. Some companies, and as we think about small molecules versus novel, I think that we have just different time horizons in terms of moving through to the clinic and moving through to approvals, and then having a wave of additional innovation kind of follow with a longer term horizon. And I think that's important because it keeps the interest alive. We can't wait as a field for 10 years. So obviously we want to see those incremental successes. We want to see that continued focus and engagement around these smaller CNS indications, and really understand that treatment success, development success is feasible. So what I'd like to see in the next 5 years are actually approvals, full stop, in rare CNS disorders, so that we know that there's an end goal in mind, and then progression of multimodality approaches that will be entering into the clinic.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see innovations in how trials are run, how clinical development happens, turn 5 years into not a blink of an eye. I mean, we're coming off a year after EMA has qualified our methods for digital twins for use in studies, both pivotal and early stage. We've seen a lot more movement than last year than in the years before, and I think I'm excited to see this propagate more and more into the industry.
Yeah, and I think in 5 years, again, it's true. It's very quick. Breaking these two things apart, I think on the rare disease side, I think we'll continue to see some really exciting progress. I think we will hopefully see some approvals with a novel modality in rare disease. Establishing a novel modality takes a really long time. So I think we'll also still see some probably very public failures, to be truth, right? But I think if we look 10 years from now, I think we'll see some of these, what we consider next-gen modalities, well established and really continue to be, not only from a patient perspective, but from an industry perspective, very attractive routes for therapeutic development.
All right, we'll wrap things up there. Thank you all for a lively and informative discussion. And thanks again to Sachs for hosting us here today.